virtual demonstrations. My name is Colin. I'm going to be narrating and assisting Jake here, who's in the role we call the gaffer. So he's got all total creative control in the piece that he's going to be making today. We got another special demo planned using some cane and doing a fancy kind of technique using that to make a very intricate pattern. But I'll explain that a little bit later on. But first, I just want to go over a little bit of the equipment we're working with in our hot shop. So first and foremost is the furnace. So the furnace is pretty much the heart and soul of any hot shop. So our furnace here is powered by natural gas and forced air, and at its fullest sits about maybe 500 pounds or so. Yeah, in our furnace we leave on all year long for up to about 5 to 7 years without turning it off, unless we need to make some emergency repairs to it. But sitting inside of there is what we call a crucible. It's like a large ceramic bowl that houses all that molten glass. So you'll see it when Jake gathers up. When that glass comes out, it's actually hot enough to emit its own light. So there's going to be kind of a yellow or orangish heat light kind of glowing, but all we use is clear glass because we like choosing whatever colors we work with. Right next to it is our pipe warmer. So this houses all the pipes and punnies we use in the hot shop. They're kind of a mixture between kind of stainless or mild steel chromoly, I believe. But nonetheless, steel is a very poor conductor of heat, but we do have to preheat the heads of them up to about 900 degrees or like a kind of dull cherry red glow so that the glass will actually adhere to them. So, and then lastly, we have our reheating chamber, which Jake just came out of. He's just heating up our kiln plate right now. So the reheating chamber is just this big drum of fire, and it does what it's named. It just reheats things. So that's holding at the same temperature as the furnace, 2,150 degrees Fahrenheit. And you'll see Jake continually go in and out of there throughout the demonstration just to make sure that the glass is hot enough so we can continue to inflate it, shape it, manipulate, do whatever with. Because as we pull it out in this room temperature atmosphere, it cools down in about 60 seconds to where we can't really work with it any further. So right now Jake's just heating up our ceramic, what we call kiln shelf, because he's going to be doing a cane roll-up today. So got some examples. So these are started out with kind of solid bars of color. And we gather clear glass over it, stretch it about maybe 30 to 40 feet, kind of like pulling taffy in a way. And it gives us these little filaments, or what we call filigree, of color. How's it looking?
Almost ready.
Yeah, so Jake's just getting a nice heat to that kiln shelf because you can only pick up hot glass with, hot glass likes hot glass. So we have to preheat this kiln shelf, and then he's got these canes already picked out that he has in this different assortment kind of pattern between the colors he chose. And by preheating this shelf, when he lays those canes on there, those canes are actually going to soak up some of that heat radiating off of that plate. So they can get just a little pre-warmed. If we were to just put those cold canes on a cold shelf, pop it right in the reheating chamber, what can happen is the glass will, it can crack or break due to thermal shock. So our glass is very susceptible to thermal shock. Thermal shock is essentially, if you have a cup of water at home, you put some ice cubes inside, it's kind of cracking and breaking. It's that drastic change in temperature that can cause those ice cubes to crack, and it's in the same sense as our glass here. So we just want to make sure everything's relatively warm or a little heated through before it's put into that extremely hot drum of fire. So you can see him right now, he's just kind of laying out those canes in an alternating pattern. He can't really touch the plate because it's probably about maybe 1,200 degrees or so, so he's just dropping them on there as kind of a rough estimate of where they're going to lay, and then he can take some tweezers and he'll end up straightening out that pattern. And so there's also these metal bars on the side here. So these two metal bars on each side, they're what we call Ferretti. There's little metal pieces of square stock, and they have a little bit of chalk on them, which acts as kind of a little release agent, because hot glass especially will stick to anything hot. So not only are these canes being prevented from rolling off of the plate, but when we do heat these up and kind of fuse them together in a little sheet, that little bit of chalk will help them not stick to the canes. So he's just getting a measurement using our pie dividers. So he's just getting the length, kind of does all the math for us and gives us the circumference we need. And now Jake's just going to go off to the side. I'll take over for him and start heating up these canes, getting them all fused together. He's going to be creating what we call the collar, which is just going to be a little bit of glass, kind of in a disc form off the head of the blowpipe with a little air channel exposed. That way, once he rolls these canes up, he can actually blow into them.
Go ahead and go for it.
Yeah?
Take the first seat.
Okay. So I'm going to take over heating these canes. And so you just don't want to stay in here and kind of forget about the canes. What we're looking for in here when we're heating these canes up is, for this first initial heat, we're looking for the edges on both sides, or at least one side, to start softening just a little bit. That's how we know the glass is getting a little hotter. This first heat is just the means to kind of get all the canes to about the same temperature. But we're not trying to roast them on this one. We'll end up flipping the plate over, because with our reheating chambers, we use what we call a ribbon burner. So the burner kind of blows in this kind of 360-degree current and allows it to heat the whole hole up on one side. So I'm going to end up having to flip the plate back around.
That's okay.
So you can see some of our canes, they're a little bit longer than the others. Ideally, when you're rolling up cane, you want them all to be the same size as they're cut. That way we can roll it up. And there's less waste or excess material that gets recycled or thrown away. But these canes have been cut up, I think, a little long time ago, so it tends to happen sometimes. So you can just see Jake over there. He's just getting everything nice and situated, making sure he's kind of the right diameter for his collar. I'll probably be good on this one. I gotta flip it. Well, I gotta flip it again.
Yeah, that'll give me time to make sure it's a little bit wider, because I kind of pushed it back a bit.
Yeah, that's fine. So the biggest thing when working with cane is, like, we got all the heat in there, but I'm gonna go for this little bit of a squeeze, and we don't want to squeeze too hard, because that'll change the circumference or diameter that he's trying to match. If you super squeeze it, then he's got to just do way more work to change the profile of that collar.
Perfect, I'll be ready after that.
I might have to do another squeeze. That little drop kind of broke things free. So it looks like Jake's about the right diameter. I'm going to go in for one final heat, and then we'll do our final squeeze to it. Make sure everything's sticking. And then what we're looking for is Jake's got to be just hot enough, just a little tacky, but what we're looking for are the canes to be mainly that kind of molten side, so they can roll up like a curtain, which we'll see in just a moment. It's one of the very satisfying moments in glass. Okay. Yep. So we're all set there. He's just going to bring this over, stick it, and you can see it's just malleable enough to where it just kind of wants to roll right up on that collar. And so the same thing with the chalk being on those metal bars, there's a little bit of kiln shelf on that plate, so the canes don't actually stick to it. So He's just taking that broom, just kind of brushing off any of that excess dust because we don't want that on our piece. So, say that was a very successful roll-up. So, oh, one thing I didn't mention, if anybody has any questions at all online, feel free to drop them on the comments below the video. We got Misha behind the camera, and he can relay those questions to me, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. So right now, we have that curtain all rolled up. Now we're just kind of sealing it up. So, kind of very gentle heat. So you want me to close that door?
Sure.
Kind of gently heating the glass to seal up that curtain, making sure none of the seams are overlapping, and especially sealing it up right on the collar there, because if it's not sealed up, when he actually starts kind of blowing into the glass after he sealed up the top a bit, there could be a tiny little air gap, and it's not going to want to inflate that glass at all. So it looks like, I think he's got it all sealed up. Now we're just going to take it to the steel table. You can maybe hear a little bit of that bumping in the texture of it. And I believe he's going to be getting close to cutting off or sealing up that top bit. You can see where having these longer canes, it makes everything a little bit more difficult, because since those are the first thing that's admitted to the reheating chamber, they're going to heat up much faster, and the thinner the glass is, the faster it heats up. So he's really got to kind of watch his turning while he's in there, because if he's turning too fast and those things start heating up real quick, they'll start kind of flaying outwards and can actually tag back. But it won't be a problem, because Jake and I are pretty experienced glass blowers here. Jake loves doing a lot of cane work, kind of doing this patterning. And while he's kind of getting that all sealed up, I can show you some more examples of cane here. It's a lot of fun, a lot of prep work. So we have right here is our most basic cane, and then anything further we get some more advanced canes called Zinfirico, and that's just lines with twists or canes with twists. So some of the more recognizable ones are right here. This is what we call Ballatini. Kind of looks like a little DNA helix in there. And so the way you would get that is you would actually you'd stick up about maybe 5 or 6 canes on a circular post and overlay glass, and as you're pulling that cane outwards, you're also twisting. So that's how we get the nice kind of twisted patterns in those individual rods. So we're just sealing up this, making sure you can actually start inflating the glass a little bit by cutting off that little top. So the top is, I've heard it called many things. I've heard it called a flower, or some often thrown around, it's Frigger, F-R-I-G-G-E-R. I don't know where the name comes from, but usually flower works for me because it looks like a flower when it comes off. So now that we got that all sealed up, we're going to, I think, start twisting this.
Yes.
All right. So that fancy technique I was talking about, in addition to already doing cane, he has planned that we're going to be trying to do some wig-wag. So wig-wag is pretty much well known in the kind of torch working or lamp working studios. So torch working and lamp working, that's where you're working in a studio where you're sitting behind a really hot torch, usually melting around 2,500 to 3,000 degrees. And that's where you can get a little bit more intricate with small patterns and details or little figurines. We have many pieces of glass here at the Glass Pavilion that kind of example that, especially with Gianni Toso. He's got one of his chess sets here. That was all made in kind of the lamp working studio. But this pattern is going to be called wig-wag, otherwise known as easily recognizable as zigzag. Kind of, it's just the pattern where he's going to be twisting it one way, and then he's going to be sitting down at the bench, actually heating up kind of about maybe 1 or 2 inch segments or areas in his cane roll-up, and twisting it the opposite way, kind of going back and forth, and it creates that zigzaggy pattern. It's a lot of fun, but it can be rather difficult. It's very time intensive. That's the thing about cane, is you're mainly kind of doing all this setup and prep to make a really cool pattern. And you're spending sometimes maybe 5 or 6 hours just setting up the pattern, pulling all the cane, and then finally you spend about an hour or two, depending on how intricate the piece is, turning it into a beautiful vessel or a bowl. So now it looks like he's going to be creating a little knob. So you can see him, he's kind of constricting that glass down using our jacks. And he pulled it towards himself, kind of slid away, pulled it toward. That way we keep the twist nice and consistent, kind of turning to the right, I believe, right?
Yeah, first to the right and then all to the right.
All right. So that little nub on the end here, that's going to end up being kind of a nice anchor point, so he can actually grip onto it with his diamond shears. And whenever the certain areas are heated, he can use it to kind of twist those canes in the opposite direction. Just wondering, do we have any questions out there? No questions at all? All right. So Jake's suited up with his blow hose now. Due to the current times we're working in, these blow hoses have made quite the comeback. Traditionally, I would be sitting at the opposite end of the blowpipe, providing him with some air pressure so he can mainly kind of focus on what's going on at hand. But now we have all these blow hoses. So we have it twisted to the right at first. Now we're going to start unraveling it and kind of twisting backwards. So that's why we have this really nice hot torch behind the bench. This is what we call an 8x8. It's just the type of kind of burner head as to why it's called that. But this is a torch that is also seen in the lamp working studio. So this allows us to get it really hot, kind of roasting that glass sometimes above the 2,100 degrees we normally work with. But it's really nice because we're allowed to spot heat specific areas. So
hand the torch to you,
yeah,
like every time,
that's fine.
just to make it easier so I can flash a little faster.
Yeah. But you can see as that glass is heating up or getting hit with that flame there, this really allows them to spot heat that one specific area. Because when we go into our reheating chamber, it's heating everything up. So it's nice if we need to like flash the piece, just making sure everything's hot for 3 or 4 seconds. And now he's heated up a certain portion. Now he's just kind of twisting backwards. And so he's going to do this probably a number of times just to make sure that pattern is to his liking. So it's kind of a difficult thing to work with because you're also trying to make sure your bubble's not too thin, because if it's too thin, it'll start kind of crinkling up on itself. But we can easily fix that just by taking it to our steel marver, maybe papering it. So going in on that second area.
Just gonna do 2.
Just 2? All right. So he's going to stick with just doing kind of 2 of those kind of backwards patterns. You don't want to do too much because that's also it's very time intensive. But you can achieve the same goal by doing less is more kind of deal. So I'm sure Misha will roll up, give you a close-up of the him kind of cranking on that cane. So you can see him, he's twisting, and he's also inflating it just the slightest bit. Nice. It looks good. Yeah. It's fun. You can do it in all different types of, using different types of colored cane. I've seen it, normally they do kind of different rainbows or kind of the whole spectrum, adding a little bit of black and white to it, kind of contrast, offset it a little bit. Now we're just going to roll it nice and smooth. I'm sure we're going to be taking another dip on this, so taking another collection of glass, because this is small enough to make maybe a small bowl or like a pint glass, but it's not a very sizable piece. So by going back into the furnace, that enables us to get a little bit more glass so we can hit to that nice, decent size of a nice vase shape or maybe a larger bowl. But before he does that, he's going to clean up the tip. Also making sure that his bubble is not too long, because if he goes into the furnace and we have a bubble that's about a foot or foot and a half long, that's going to heat up really quickly, and when we come out it can be rather uncontrollable. So just kind of compressing that back, but that looks really nice.
I'm gonna push it back.
All right, he just said he's going to push it back just a little bit. So while he's doing this, I'll kind of go over how we get a little bit of color. I know we haven't gotten any questions yet, but if you're ever wondering at home, or for the people that are actually out now watching through the glass, the way we get color is by actually contaminating clear glass with metal oxides. So we start off with the kind of raw material. We melt what we call cullet, which are little ice cubes, and kind of ice cubey shapes, which I can go over later. But we start off with that raw batch material, which is like a powderized soda lime glass that we have. And we throw in different metal oxides. So like cadmiums and seleniums actually create reds and yellows. And then cobalt can create a nice dark blue. You're going to do a floppy bowl?
We're going to do a floppy.
All right, well, unfortunately, it looks like while I was talking, that pattern may have gotten a little too hot in specific areas, and it actually touched back on itself inside of the bubble. And that's really hard to kind of blow back out, because you'll end up catching all these little thin strands inside of it. So unfortunately, the best thing to do is just kind of trash it and start over. So we're going to switch to something a little bit different. We're actually going to switch to using what we call frit. So frit, we've have about hundreds of thousands of ways of coloring the glass. Frit is what we call, it's just all this kind of speckled up glass. So we can get it in different consistencies. This is about maybe a nice kosher salt. We can grind it up further into a sugar consistency or pulverize it into flour. And just depends on what we're looking for as our color aesthetic or pattern we're going for. Usually a lot of sculptors will opt for using powders, because it can kind of create different gradiencies and add to almost kind of texturing the glass a little bit. So Jake's dipped out of that furnace. We got all clear glass. I believe, are you starting the bubble on this first one? No, do a double dip. All right, so he's gonna do a double dip. So gathering once, letting it cool down in that room temperature atmosphere just to develop a little bit of a skin layer, kind of a cold outer layer. And then gathering once more really quickly. And that just allows us to kind of easily kind of double or get what we call a gather and a half, just building up that material. So the colors he's using right now are, we have a vanilla, and then we also have what we call a golden aventurine. So aventurine, which in Italian terms, it means adventure. So the golden aventurine is really nice color. It has a nice shimmering aesthetic to it, just due to the high copper content in the glass. So this creates a nice kind of sparkling or glimmering effect when picked up and blown out. So he's gonna go through probably maybe another coat of it. Just doing a little tap and turn, and what happens, the reason that frit actually sticks to it is because it's nice and small. They're little small particles. And when it comes in contact with that hot glass, that molten layer really kind of superheats those little chips up and allows them to stick to it. And then he takes it back to the reheating chamber, gets it all nice and hot, and melts it back in. You're doing one more layer, you're good. All right. Yeah, I can do that. So he's going to switch over to using his marbering table. So the marber allows us to kind of shape and cool the glass down. And he's mainly using it right now to kind of make sure all that glass on his pipe is nice and homogeneous. It's all one even shape. Now he's going to, yeah. So he might do that once more. He might switch back to using maybe the blocking tool, but he'll be popping his bubble in here real soon. That way we can inflate it later on. Oh, we're going fish scale?
Yeah.
All right. So he's opting for doing kind of a fish scale pattern. So whenever we have that frit onto the glass, it creates a very kind of specularized pattern. And he's mainly twisting in one specific area. And what that's doing is he's letting friction take over and twist up all that glass. So it creates different striations in the pattern, as you can see there. Now he's going to get it hot, probably dip back in once more and actually twist the opposite way. And what that does, it kind of bends and creates a nice scalloped effect in the glass, as we call it, kind of a fish mold or fish scale pattern. It's really fun. It's a lot of glass blowers will start out doing it in their first couple of years, kind of learning different patterning and changing the way the colors look, just to test out different samples. So he goes in there. Since this mold's a little bit wider of a mold, you saw him earlier, he gave it a little swing just to elongate it just the slightest bit. He might do that once more, and then now he's going to twist the opposite way on the marber. So when we're in that reheating chamber, it's really nice. We're just looking for a little bit of movement in the glass. That's how we know it's getting all nice and hot. So we're looking for some movement, and we're also feeling for that movement as well. Now you can see as he's twisting it up, and he'll bring it up to the camera, you'll be able to see that really nice kind of scalloped feature to the glass. It almost gives it a little marbling effect as well. So now he's just going to get this real hot. You're going for the blocking tool? All right. So he's going to go for the blocking tool. The marber's really nice. It's a slab of mild steel, something like that. It's really nice to take heat out of specific areas of the glass or get a nice even shape, but our next tool, called the blocking tool, it's also very nice. It's not metal. It's not going to take all the heat out of the glass instantly. So the scoop here is carved out of a piece of cherry wood. Fruit wood is ideal because it has a very tight grain pattern and a low sap content. So as soon as these scoops are carved out, or blocks are carved out, they live their life submerged in water. So when they're brought in contact with the glass, it's not actually burning the wood. It's creating a little layer of steam that the glass actually glides on. So it's a little bit gentler than rolling it back and forth on that steel table, taking all the heat out. So we'll probably do the shaping once more with the block, developing kind of, once again, a cool outer layer, leaving that core nice and molten, and then he's going to pop his bubble into the glass. So he's going to pressurize the pipe, just putting a little bit of air in there, and as he covers it with his thumb, that air has no way to travel but right into the glass. And so the pressure's not doing it, it's actually the moisture. As this breath steams, there will be a bubble that grows pretty soon, right about here. You can see it, it's grown just the slightest bit. So now we have about a golf ball sized bubble in that glass. Now we're just going to let it cool down a little bit. Probably take one gather on top of it. And we've opted for a bowl this time. So we're going to be making a different form. So he's really letting his bubble cool down. We can't go into that furnace too hot, otherwise the glass will actually heat up and collapse on itself. Or when we come out, you'll see us kind of trying to wrangle it back in because it's just really moving. It's very fluid-like. Now when that glass comes out of the furnace, it's about the same viscosity as room temperature honey. So it's always moving, and if we stop turning at any point, it'll start falling towards the floor. So we want to make sure we have some nice control when we go in there with a cold bubble. So there you can see we got a nice fresh layer right on top of it. Taking it over to our fancy pipe cooler there. That's just a little trough of water. Allows him to cool the glass, or cool the pipe down closer to the glass in the pipe head, so he's got more leverage over it. You want to take a heat for you?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
That works.
Into this nice even form. So reattaching that blow hose, this will allow him to provide his air pressure once more for those who are just now tuning in or those that are outside watching us. So Jake's been doing this for roughly about 5 years now, and we've kind of got it down to a science where depending on how we're trying to set up a specific form, especially like he had mentioned, we're making bowls, or he's going to be making a fluted bowl. So it always starts out at these steps of kind of blocking that glass back up, blowing it out just the slightest bit, kind of thinning out those walls towards the head of the pipe, and now he's going to bring it on over probably to this larger marver so he can actually really kind of stretch out a little bit and roll his glass kind of at a high angle. And just being in contact with that bottom there, this glass has a really good memory, and it's making that glass really kind of thicken up down there. That way we can kind of control, not have a top heavy piece. We can have a nice bottom heavy piece. It's weighted. No chances of it tipping over. But as he rolls the tip on there, he leans it over and he's blowing with his air hose, and it's mainly blowing the top half nice and thin. That's just a nice way that we can control the thickness. Ideally, we're shooting for, say if you went to the Libby factory or IKEA or something like that, we want something that's nice and evenly blown out. No problem. So now before we get too large, we got to create our little constriction line. So he's using our jacks right here, using the strap of the jacks, cooling down the bottom, probably blowing just a little bit. And now we're going to put a weak point right off the head of the blowpipe. This is what we call the constriction line, or the jack line. So the jack line is just a weak point in the glass where eventually we're going to tell it to break so we can flip it around and open it up. So that'll happen later during kind of the transfer part of the process. But if we didn't have this constriction line in there, the glass doesn't know to break. And so when we get to that point of transferring the piece, we can add water to it to create some thermal shock in the glass. And it could potentially send a crack running down the piece or take a giant chunk out of the lip, which isn't ideal. Are you doing a foot with this? Okay. So it's nice while you have the heat in there, you can kind of do a quick little 2-in-1 motion where you create that constriction line and then you use that jack or the strap of the jack as kind of a thinner portable marver. And he's really kind of cooling down the bottom as he's blowing into the glass. It's inflating every area that hasn't kind of remembered to stay cold. And it's coming out real nice. It looks, those two colors mesh together, look real good together. Probably gonna blow it up just a little bit more. Now that he's got that constriction line in there, he's mainly gonna focus the bottom 2/3 in the reheating chamber, getting it hotter, probably maybe come out, give it a little length to it. But he doesn't wanna heat up everything because with that constriction line, it's much tighter than the rest of the form. So it'll really heat up and move at that one specific point, which can make it a lot harder for us to blow out the form. So now he's using that newspaper, kind of going back and forth.
I'll take it close.
Yeah. All right. So it looks like we have it all blown out to where he wants it. We're going to add a cookie foot to it. Is that what you want, Jake?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to add a cookie foot. So he's just going to kind of babysit his piece right now. I'm going to gather up a little bit of glass and cut it off on the marber. And the reason we call it a cookie foot is because glass, like I said, to a table, naturally it's going to kind of spread out into a little puck shape or a cookie shape. So just going to let this glass cool down a little bit. But what he's going to be using it for is, like I said, a cookie foot. So it's just going to be a solid base that's going to act as like a pedestal for the bottom of this bowl. Now just kind of dropping it out on the table, cutting it away. And he's going to bring his bowl over nice and vertical. And we don't want to stick it down immediately. What we're looking for is we're just going to make a tiny touch to it. And in case we stuck it off center, we can kind of use that friction between the table and the glass and actually slide our piece, kind of using it to center just a little bit. Nice job, bud. Right behind you. So now anytime we cut off hot glass on a steel table or any cold surface, it creates what we call chill marks in the glass. So it's just little ripples or a little texture in the glass. So we just kind of heat it up a little bit, mainly focus heat on that bottom. And now I know he's probably going to go for his newspaper. And just by the way he kind of holds it in his hand, he's going to really kind of push into the bottom of that glass with his thumb and curl his fingers back, kind of pulling that glass outwards, creates a nice kind of tapered foot for the bottom. And so there we have a nice kind of tapered little pedestal. Foots aren't always needed when you're adding them to a piece. They are nice. It adds a little extra decoration to it, and when you put it on a countertop or a table or anywhere, it kind of looks like it's elevated off of that table. How are you looking?
I'm just gonna go on real quick with the paddle. And then you ready for a pump?
Okay.
On.
So just kind of cleaning it up a little. He's got his jacks kind of set at that angle. I'm coming on with this paddle. Just make sure everything's nice and flat. And you can see it's not totally flat. We have what we call a little bit of a kick in the bottom of the piece. So when you think of any piece at home, you ideally don't want it to be totally flat because otherwise it actually has a better chance of falling over. So we add this little indentation in the bottom. Same thing you'll find in the bottom of wine bottles. That way it just sits on the outer rim. It'll have more stability that way. So now we're done totally blowing the piece out. Now we're going to be doing the transfer. So this is the part of the process where I was talking about earlier where we're going to have to break the glass to finish it out. So I'm creating what we call a punti. Punti in Italian, what I know means point. It's just going to be a new point of contact that's going to temporarily hold on to this piece while we open up and change the lip of the, or the profile of the form. This is one of the more stressful parts of the process because this is usually when you're first starting out as a glass blower, this is where you break a lot of stuff. Because you want to be just the right temperature. I have to make sure that I'm not too hot to where I'll actually fuse to the bottom of his piece, potentially take that foot off, but I'm not too cold to where it won't stick and it'll just drop right between. He's just been monitoring his heat at that time. Now I'm gonna bring this punny over to him in just a moment. He'll grab his tweezers and shoot for center. So he does a little touch and turn that kind of creates a small little kind of wick on the tip. Creates a little additional stress so it knows where to break. And now he's just taking his time, kind of centering it up, waiting for me to give him the heads up it's okay. Now he's going to add a little bit of water. He's going to chill that glass out. With a little tap, it breaks free, just like that. And that's a nice, successful transfer. So you can see we still got a little movement on this new metal rod. So he's just going to take a moment while it's still hot and moving. He's looking for any high sides on that punty. And it's just a second chance that we get at kind of straightening the glass, because ideally he wants the opening of his vessel to be in line with his new axis or the new punty rod. Any questions out there? No questions at all? All right, so this is a longer reheat of the process because he added water. We kind of let that glass get really cold so we could break it. And now he's going to stand there roughly about 45 seconds, super long time. It's a long time for us standing in front of this 2,000 degree drum of fire, but what we're looking for, and as I mentioned in the very beginning, we're looking for a little bit of movement. He's actually looking at that edge of the opening. When you break that glass off and it's relatively cold, it looks a little darker in appearance, but as he starts heating that glass up, that darkness will start to kind of dissipate, and we'll start seeing a little bit of movement start to happen. And so the movement that we see, we can also feel. So that's why a lot of glass blowers, we're not actually going to be wearing gloves during the process, because it not only hinders our dexterity, but it also hinders the way that we can actually feel the glass kind of pulling and torquing against us. Sorry. Now we got it nice and hot. You can kind of see that heat differential. And now he's really starting to just kind of rip it open. This is going to happen in a couple of reheats. Sometimes you can get lucky and do the one heat wonder, just get it all nice and hot, kind of rip it open. Usually for cups, that happens a lot. Probably do one more time, one or two more times. All right. So we're going to do one more kind of opening, using the jacks to kind of rip open that lip. And as it's doing that, it's also thinning the glass out, which is nice. Because in a moment, we're going to be using a little of centrifugal force to pull the glass in an outwards motion. Awesome. So right now we have a really nice bowl right here. It'd probably hold like a whole box of cereal. But we're going to change its appearance just a little bit. So we're going to add that little bit of centrifugal force like I talked about. You want all the doors? Yeah. So I'm going to open up all these doors. That's going to allow him to get the proper diameter he needs. So when he's in there, he's slowly turning that punty. And what that's doing is he's looking for a little bit of that heat to really start kind of building up. And as those edges start to ruffle, he'll start turning faster and faster. And that force is just pulling that glass outwards, kind of turning it more into a platter-like shape. And then just by angling it down a little bit, we can let gravity take control and create the nice ruffled edges, almost like either a fluted bowl or kind of like a handkerchief bowl. And so there would be our final form. So now we're just gonna kind of balance the heat out just a little bit. It was really hot at the lip just a moment ago, and now we're gonna boost a little heat into that punty. So there we have it. We have our piece. We're going on down over to the knockoff station. So how we're going to get this off is just by adding a little bit of water to that connection point between the punty and the bottom of the form, using a super sophisticated butter knife. And with a little tap, it'll come off. Just like that. I got this. So now anytime you break glass, it's always going to be pretty sharp. So we're just going to take kind of the lightsaber of the studio once more, superheat the bottom of that area, get it all melted in, and then we have kind of our bronze TMA Maker's Mark stamp here. That way you can stamp it, signing that it was a piece made here at the Toledo Museum of Art. Oops, sorry. And with that, we have our final form, and away it goes. Awesome, big round of applause for Jake on that one. Beautiful piece. So, in any part of the process, the way we have to get glass to cool down, it has to go through some cooling process. So, we have our annealing ovens here that are holding roughly about 918 degrees. It's a nice stable temperature for our glass to cool down at, or hold at. It's nice and stable to where it's not too hot to where it's going to start slumping and manipulating, but it's not too cold to where it's going to crack and break. So as we finish any kind of piece, we're going to continually load all our work in there, and it's going to hold at that temperature. Now, when we're done for the day, we'll send it down on its annealing cycle, and what that's going to do is slowly, kind of hour by hour, it's going to incrementally lose about 100 degrees each. That way, not only outside, but the inside core starts relieving and kind of pushing that stress outwards. If we were to leave that table on the, or that bowl on the table or on the floor, it's going to get too cold way too quickly, crack and explode, which isn't safe. So ideally we want to pull our pieces out all in as a whole. So it goes through that annealing cycle. If you've been to the Glass Pavilion before, we have a big old bench in the center of our ancient collection. It's all solid glass. It was a casted bench. That kind of just explores how long that glass can have to take to cool down. That bench, sitting at its center point, is about maybe 3 feet thick, and we know it sat in there for about 11 months. Unfortunately, 11 months wasn't long enough, and there's still a crack running through it. So experts have said that it could have stayed in there an additional 3 to 4 months. Luckily, ours is only about 16 hours. So that's about all I have for you for the demonstration. We'd like to thank Owens, Illinois once again for very helpful in sponsoring our demonstration, so we can kind of keep them going, keep our public engaged with the glassblowing process. Is there any questions online? No questions at all? All right, well, thank you for tuning in to us. We host these demonstrations on Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday at 2 o'clock. And also be sure to check out online on the TMA website. We've been doing a lot of sand casting demonstrations where we'll send out all these different molds or ceramic to you. You get to make a mold of what you want. We'll press it into this foundry sand and then ladle molten glass into it, so you'll have a memory kept in glass forever. So thank you. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and thanks for watching.